Hello, and this is the Curious Connector. I'm Sophie Tversky, and I'm here today with the incredible Audette Exel, who, amongst a lot of things, is the Chief Executive Officer of Adara Group and Non-Executive Director of Suncorp Group. Welcome, Audette.
Thanks, Sophie. Great to be here with you today.
So let's start off by delving into what is Adara Group and what is for-purpose business?
Yeah, that's a great way to start. The crazy world of Adara. Let me give you a snapshot explanation of what Adara is. Adara is now nearly amazingly 22 years old. And I set it up with the purpose of finding ways to bridge the divide between the worlds of the most advantaged people in the world and the most disadvantaged. So our tagline is actually Bridging Worlds. And the model is nothing more complicated than a couple of corporate advice businesses, Wall Street type businesses, if you like, that advise big companies on mergers and acquisitions and the capital markets. And those businesses are run entirely for the purpose of generating fees and revenue for the much bigger part of Adara, which is an international development organisation. So that part of the organisation is full of amazing development specialists. We're amongst the world leaders in a couple of really cool things. The first is care to preterm and low birth weight babies, our tiniest clients, in places without consistent electricity supply, so really, really low resource settings internationally. And the other area of specialty for us is we're amongst the remotest deliverers of health and education service in the world. So to give you a sense of what I mean by that, our most remote project is on the Nepali-Tibetan border, and it takes 25 days to walk from that project site to a Nepali road. So we're an unusual hybrid mix of businesses that generate revenue from the very top end of the corporate sector, and they're sitting co-housed right beside brilliant international development specialists. One crowd are making the money and the other crowd are deploying it for service delivery to the poor. So we're an unusual hybrid model. And for me, business for purpose means exactly that. Every single day here, whether you're an investment banker working in that team or you're a neonate specialist or you're an educator, development specialist, we all are getting up with one sole purpose, and that's service delivery to people in extreme poverty. So everyone has a different way of thinking about what their purpose is. But for me, it's about purpose sitting at the absolute heart. The reason for your existence of the business is your purpose. And so for us at Adara, that's pretty clear and easy to see because we've been doing it for 21 years.
And at the heart of your business is really, as you said, bridging the gap between different industries, bringing them together, which is the purpose of this project as well. And I wanted to delve into what does cross interdisciplinary and organizational problem solving look like in terms of what are the challenges and opportunities that are facing across industry organization?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's funny because when people talk about diversity, which is such an inclusion, it's such an important conversation. But for us, diversity of voice and inclusion is so embedded in our model. You know, we're diverse in terms of our skill sets and the industries that we're working across. We're diverse in terms of our ethnicities, our religions or not religions, our ethnicities, our gender, our countries, cross divide. And what that means is a huge complexity if you don't bring that together with clarity, but massive power when it works, because of course you have so many voices in the room. We talk a lot at Adara about the thinking pot, throwing ideas into the thinking pot. So we will have times when we've got medical anthropologists, brilliant medical anthropologists, great educators, corporate advisors, senior lawyers, everybody, clinicians, the Ugandans, Nepalis, everybody together, putting their heads together in thinking pot, trying to figure out, the way forward. So there's huge power in the diversity of thinking, cross-discipline, across all those other things that I've described. And of course, there can be complexity, because when people think differently, finding your way through, and that we're speaking different first languages, for instance, finding your way through that sometimes it can be complex, incredibly interesting, but complex. But massive. The 99% of my thinking about that is how unbelievably powerful it is, and how lucky we are. And I often feel that when I'm sitting in a room. We just had actually our senior emerging leaders and global leaders from around the globe here, with all our business teams here as well. We had 2 glorious weeks of thinking and talking and debating and laughing and partying. And as we were doing that, you know, I was watching this beautiful thing that's created when people come together with real clarity. Why are we here? Why do we do what we do? To problem solve together.
Actually, I have a question on that. Obviously, you have the importance of having diverse perspectives and diverse voices in a room, but you also, as you said, wanted this clarity and succinct vision and clarity in objectives and collective objective. And how do you bring those two things together, championing the diverse, but also having a unifying objective?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, you have to you figure that out and so you always start with the why do we exist. And for us, if you look at anything that Adara puts out, you'll see it right there. You know, it's a belief statement almost. You know, we believe that every person in the world is entitled to essential service delivery, no matter where they're born. That is something that no matter whether you're an investment banker in Adara, you know, you're an anthropologist or you're an educator, no matter where you're from, we all buy into that. So there's real unity. You start with the why, and we have debated the why over the years, but it's incredible amount. There is unity on that. So you begin with that. You crystallize people around something that everybody buys into, and that is not a top-down thing. So as I said, we bring people together for 2 weeks a year. We have mini summits on the ground in our project sites. We have a major summit every year, and we always begin with the why. And in fact, on the walls of our office here in Sydney, you'll see our why is plastered all over the offices. So once you start with the why, in fact, it really helps the conversation, because it helps you to have a debate with diverse views, recognizing everybody has a different perspective, but never doubting that everybody's there for the same reason that you are. And so you very much depersonalize a diverse debate when you are locked in. We're shoulder to shoulder on our purpose. We may have radically different views on how we get to a particular objective, but because there's this deep respect and caring, and we're locked in on our purpose, it all unfolds as a fascinating way to think, rather than polarity or people in their separate corners, or some of the stuff that you see going on when people have diverse points of view and they can't find ways to communicate with each other. Boy, is that ever encapsulated in the world we're living in right at the moment, right? But I think that clarity, you have to start with you have to have the clarity of the mission, the purpose right at the start. Every problem then can be solved with that. It's a cornerstone, it's a foundation stone that you stand on.
And in terms of your full purpose business, do you think that is becoming easier or harder as a business model? Is it, I mean, it's so necessary. We live in a world where the discrepancy between the wealthy and the poor is growing. Do you think that model will increase? And what sparked you in going that direction in the first place?
Okay, a whole lot of questions there.
I know.
If you go back to the start, is it getting easier or harder? First of all, it's never easy to run a business, right? But it's always fun. So that's the first thing I'd say. Secondly, the context, the understanding of society around why people want to run great businesses that are great for the world, if you take a trendy sort of way of thinking about it, that context has fabulously changed since I've been doing this. So 22 years ago, we're nearly coming to 22 years old. 22 years ago, people thought that I was a lunatic or a liar when I was talking about building corporate advice businesses for the sole purpose of serving the world's poor. Now, we're almost mainstream. And there's this huge wave of impact investors, socially responsible investing, the B Corp movement, ESG, it's CSR, you name it, there's a million acronyms. But the world's largest businesses are talking about their role in society, how they must have a purpose and they must have a social license to operate. That is the most wonderful sea change. So it's never easy to run a business, but is the setting, is the context easier? Is it less complicated to explain these days than it was when we began? No question. And but that being said, it's always more difficult when you're operating outside of the silos that the world wants us to think in. and that society sees things in. So when you're working cross rather than running down a track, when you're working cross discipline, you have to get pretty sharp with how you message and explain, and you have to recognize that some people put their head on their side, the head on the side when they're listening to you as if you're a total weirdo. That's actually okay. There's a siege change of thinking about this stuff. In terms of why, I mean, I don't know how I would get up and look at myself in the mirror in the world that we live in if I wasn't spending my life trying to do my own tiny piece of the puzzle for social justice. I mean, it's why, because if I was born a little girl, instead of being born a lucky little Kiwi girl, I could have been born a little girl somewhere else and my life would have been wholly different, because 800 million of our brothers and sisters who happen to live in different places don't eat twice a day, because there is massive wealth and income inequality in the world, because unfairness is a part of the fabric of the structures we've created to move power. So why? Because I couldn't live with myself if I was doing anything else. And why the way we did it? Because I'm incredibly interested in power shift. And I think to shift power, you have to try hard to think about pushing people to see models differently. So pushing people to see, oh, you can use a business, an investment banking business, to affect social change or help the poor. Or, oh, you can run an international development organization with a business embedded in its heart. Whatever whatever it is, whatever preconception you're trying to bash down. So why? Because, I believe that we need to bridge divide. We need to use our business skills to change the world. That's my place to play. I have a huge respect for everybody else playing in different places. The activist community, I love the activist community. I could easily have spent my life there. The policymakers, the politicians who are the politicians with integrity. There's millions of different ways to do it, but my way, I decided, was going to be engagement. And gee, it's been quite a ride, and it's been a lot of fun along the way.
And driving that problem solving orientation that you carry throughout your work, how did you start with your model? How did you construct it in a way that you thought, this is the way I want to solve this?
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? Everyone's process is different, but let me talk about creativity, innovation. Maybe they're the same thing. So I'll tell you about the last business. We launched this new, really quite out of construct business 4.5 years ago called Adara Partners. And it's a business that has a model where it has a panel of 15 of Australia's most famous, highest integrity and most well-respected investment bankers and senior non-exec directors and some really, really senior lawyers. So it's a panel. And when I'm talking about the most famous, I'm talking about David Gonski. I'm talking about the guy who runs Goldman Sachs and the guy who runs Citigroup. And those ones are all guys. Thankfully, I've got some brilliant senior women in there as well, but very senior people. And it's a model where they agree to work as volunteers for the Adara businesses outside of their home firms, advising big clients in Australia with all the fees that they make. And they work together across their competitive boundaries with all the fees that are made on those mandates, those engagements going to our work with people in poverty. So really crazy model. Lots of people thought we wouldn't get off the ground. So what was the process around that? For me, I'm very visual, so the process began, and I like to think for long periods. I often mull ideas over. So I mulled the idea over of, I need to kind of evolve my thinking. There's another business coming. What have I learned? I thought for months, probably years, I was mulling over the idea, and then I suddenly had this blinding moment where I thought, there's something in this construct, in this panel idea. So I actually decided, I said to my team here, I've had a really good idea, and I'm going down to my mum's place on the beach a few hours south of here, and I'm going to draw it. And I need drawing paper, stickers, colouring in pens, and I'm going to be gone for a week. Anyway, they all looked at me like, the look on their face was, she at last has gone completely crackers. We knew that she was under too much stress. Anyway, I went out and bought my big bag of art supplies and I drew it. So I spent 10 days on the floor of my wonderful mum's place and I drew what I could see. I drew the vision. And the more I drew, the more I could see how it could work. And then I rolled it all up and I posted it back to Sydney, and asked my EA to please find a creative designer to take the drawings and turn them into proper designs. Anyway, I know when he unrolled them and looked at them, he really thought that I had had a serious, something serious was happening to my health, because it was full of stickers and stars. Anyway, my process is visual. So it's about thinking, then it's about drawing, and then it's about, once I can see something in the drawing, it's about then starting to bring it together. And then the next part for me is, once I begin I can visualize where I need to go, then it's about talking to others, and putting the idea out, throwing the idea up. So I actually asked, I think, about 15 of the most senior people I know, who have very diverse points of view, some of them very different to me, to take half a day, and I presented the idea to them. And I decided I'm going to just listen to what they have to say. It was very funny, actually, because a few of them were saying, that's a really dumb idea. But going through that process, I was able to tweak it. It's very iterative. So for me, it's very visual. It involves a lot of thinking. Think again. Think again, and then it's about asking people you trust for their views, and then iterating until you finally decide. Okay, now is the now I've got it right. So yeah, so for me, that journey was probably a 4-year journey from starting to think to the launch. And refining my thinking. One other thing I'll say that I've learned about, because I've been working out of construct a huge chunk of my career now, I've learned that if you're going to try and innovate, for me anyway, the way I describe it is innovate with familiarity. So when you're trying to describe something to somebody, if it's completely outside of their worldview, it's a really tough conversation. Whereas if you can find a way to explain something and say, and this is similar to X, the chances of the key people you need to grasp the idea come up much, significantly increased. So in my case, there's a structure in Australian corporate life called the Takeovers Panel. And it's a way where disputes for big takeovers are mediated and arbitrated, basically. And it's a panel of it's very prestigious to sit on it. It's industry experts who are in the industry that work together across competitive boundary, and they're paid nothing, or very peanuts, really. And once I looked at that and I realized, there's a panel structure already. So then when I started to explain what I was doing, when I'm in the market, I say, it's like the Takeovers Panel. And people go, I get it. So that's the other thing I'd say that I've learned through process. I think everybody's process is different. But for mine, it's find things that are familiar to people. Once you've decided what you're going to do, find things that are familiar so other people can then understand what you're trying to catch and be part of the journey.
And when you're solving problems with your team, particularly business problems, and you're solving for 2 different sectors, do you use that in the business process as well, in terms of enabling their voice to be heard, but also really understanding the process and the complexity of ideas when you're solving a problem? How do you use that process when you're trying to help them and their voice being heard?
Problem solving is a really for us is whether it's on the business, we talk about biz and dev on the business side or on the NGO side. Again, it depends on the problem. Really in terms of, but as a kind of generalization, we put a lot of voices to solve problems. We put our heads together because we've learned how powerful that is. Sometimes on the business, if you've got a problem, you don't necessarily want to be dragging your entire poor team into, oh my God, we've got a huge problem on the business. So you've got to be careful when you're a leader about which problems you're bringing into which group of people, and how you're hearing lots of voices. At the same time, it's not freaking everybody out. So I would say that business problems tend to be solved more quietly with a smaller group. But it's interesting, even that, when I think about it, the panel structure in Adara Partners is business. One of the key parts of the model is we have at least two of these panel members, as we call them, working together. And that's because even though they're both incredibly senior, what we know is putting two people who are very senior but have different experiences together, you get a much better outcome for your client. When we put there's diverse voices always, no matter what we do, but it's particularly marked when you're problem solving for the NGO work, for the development work. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One, the problems that you deal with when your work is intervening in the lives of vulnerable clients, they're really serious problems. You cannot take it lightly. It is not a game. You know, if you're working with people who are living in poverty, or kids who are in the trafficking trade, or people who are living remotely with HIV, like, it's very, very serious. And you have to make really good decisions. In business, you tend to make really quick decisions. In the NGO sector, you need to think, and you need to think again. And so when we problem solve, the unforeseen consequences piece is really frightening in the development sector. So when we problem solve there, first of all, we go way more slowly than we do on the business because of the size of the responsibility. And because we've learned over the years that things are not obvious, what might happen is not obvious. So you need to get an anthropologist talking to a clinician, and a Ugandan talking to a Nepali, and an Australian development expert, you know, talking to an educational expert, or a trauma counsellor talking to, and you need to, we will form groups in the organisation if there's a really significant issue, and we will think, and we will think again. We try really hard not to make decisions too quickly that impact people's lives. So I'll give you an example of that. And when in 2015 Nepal had a horrendous earthquake, as you probably know, we were right in the teeth of that because we have a significant team up there, and we work with communities who are massively affected, a lot of loss of life. It was a really, really terrible time. And we formed immediate project teams to deal with emergency response. But then when we went through the period of the crisis response into what are we going to do long term, how are we going to think about that? What's our best intervention here? What's our best use? What does the government want from us? What are other NGOs doing? How should we be thinking about this? What's best practice for, build back better? And we probably took most of 9 months to 12 months. We're still providing a lot of support and help in a sort of early stage response at that point, but really, really worked hard as a team to brainstorm, how do we think about this and what do we do? And I give you an example. The area that the government asked us to work in as a long-term response is in an area, because we're pretty well known for our anti-trafficking work, which is the epicenter of girl trafficking in Nepal. And so a lot of that conversation was, and there's a lot of organised crime there, so was, okay, if we're going to go into that community, what's the best possible intervention we can do in that setting to work with that client group with that overlay? And they're very serious conversations. So the problem solving on the NGO side is thoughtful. We take time and we listen to a whole lot of voices. We debate and we debate again. It would drive our business people crazy, but it's the right approach for the seriousness of that situation. So I hope that's answered the question. They're quite different beasts in terms of diversity always, but in the way that we look at and think about, okay, this problem needs this approach, they can be quite different.
How do you go from identification of solution through that elongated process and debate to then implementation? How do you make that link?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Lots of people ask me about, okay, you can have these great ideas, but how do you actually get started? Or, moving into implementation it gets easier, I have to say, the longer that you're in the game, because the step over from thinking to action is less terrifying. A few things. First of all, I should say everything in terms of problem solving for us on the NGO side is driven by community and all our astonishing local teams. So we never solve problems by coming at it from the top. Everything comes up, and then there's a debate where everybody's voice is heard. I should just say that. In terms of taking that, so once you've gone through all that process, Then for us over the years, what we've learned is how to plan, how to and how to actually and how to plan, how to budget, and how to basically flight path a journey to a solution. So we run planning cycles of 3 years, and that is a massive process. Again, that all comes up from our people and the amazing communities we work with, and it structures itself as it comes up. It comes up as a sort of amorphous mass, and then ultimately it ends up in an astonishing, beautiful plan. And in fact, our plans, you can see if you look on our website, all our plans come up into one beautiful drawing, which catches it. Underneath, there's a million spreadsheets and timelines and responsibilities, but comes up into something that everybody can see. Everybody knows which road we're running down. And once you've got to that point, once you have clarity of, okay, this is what we're going to do. These are the 8 things we're going to do in the next 3 years, or for this problem, we're going to do the following 4 things. Here's the budget. Here's the timeline. Here's who's responsible for them. And then it's just about ready, set, go. Once you delegate power to people, so and you've gone through all that process, it unfolds itself. It becomes much less scary to take the first step, because the second, third, fourth, and fifth steps are kind of already mapped for you. You know what road you're running down. I should say, when I first started this whole wonderful adventure of Adara, the last thing I did was plan. So, a lot of people, hilariously, because we've made it for a couple of decades, people now look back on what we've done and they think it was some kind of incredible vision and strategy, which always makes me laugh, because the truth is it was really, a huge compulsion. I was so compelled to do something for the poor, and it was a crazy idea that I just decided I'd try. And it was a huge amount of hubris and arrogance for me. I just believed I could make it happen. So it only took a lot of mistakes and years of learning for me to figure out, we actually need to plan. And so these days we're kind of masters of the art. Our plans are very real. They're not things that people shove in a drawer once they're done. Our budgets are genuine delegated authority. Once you have a budget and you're a budget holder in Adara, no matter where you are in the world, away you go. But it's taken years and years for us to figure out, okay, this is how you bring something that's you can't almost get your hands around, into something that's very real. And then you hand the baton to people and say, there you are, run, we're with you, go run, go do it, go get after it.
A living, breathing organism in itself.
Yes, it is, exactly.
Yeah.
It is a living, breathing organism in itself. And it's a beautiful living, breathing organism in itself. And its heart is full of people of passion. They're enormously capable. And that's a beautiful thing to work in every day. It's a beautiful environment to work in every day.
That's a wonderful segue to my next question, which is, I'm hearing loud and clear this theme of humble leadership and bringing community to community, visualizing your vision and realizing that you need to have a plan and people on board to make it happen.
Yeah.
I feel like we often get caught up in this concept of leadership as the expert and followers.
Yes.
Is just, I feel, in my opinion, is the incorrect way of looking at leadership. And I was just wondering, from your perspective, how does leadership in your role interact with the problems you solve and how you go about it?
Yeah, it's you. I could not agree with you more wholeheartedly, that leadership is not. It's interesting. I sometimes think it's the verb to lead, right, rather than the noun to be a leader, the leader. Leadership is about unleashing people. It's also about making sure that you've got first, and it's also about taking responsibility. A huge part of it. That's one of the reasons it's scary and it's exhausting and all the other things, and lonely, because you have to take responsibility. And you have to unleash people, but you have to unleash them with the resources and the parameters, and to ensure that they have the skills and the ability to actually do what it is you want them to do. Then you have to get out of their way. So that's very nuanced in terms of how much you're hands-on and how much you're hands-off. But if there's one thing I've learned for sure, in terms of the humility piece, you know, I think if you go through a journey where you just make mistake after mistake after mistake, which is my journey, if you haven't done that and learned humility, well, you know, what world are you living in? I used to joke with the Adarians and say, you know, if there's only one word I want you to, you know, put across your forehead, tattoo on your forehead, humility. In our work with people in poverty, if you come to that with arrogance, if you come to that top down, if you think that you can, and you have the solution for communities who are astonishing and living in situations that you would never survive in, but somehow you, the Westerner, has the solution, you know, you've already lost the game. And so, you know, humility is it's the starting gate if you want to affect change, social change or behavioural change. It's also just the outcome of a 20-year journey. If unless you really don't understand what's gone on. So when you've made a lot of mistakes, but so back to the sort of paternalistic, top-down, hierarchical leadership. Those days, I hope, are nearly behind us. I think there are some dinosaurs out there that's still running businesses that way. We just have to kind of last them out. If you look at the world of social entrepreneurship and young entrepreneurs, if you look at female leadership, now these are generalizations I'm giving you, but women leaders, I think we're seeing a move to collaboration, a move to servant leadership would be one way that people would speak about leadership. It's a whole different frame, and you know, some of it's as simple as good business. If you want to unleash talent, if you want to hire the best people in the world, they have to want to come and work with you. You know, you can't be a monster, you know, much as you and all as you'd like to be. Gen Y, Gen X, and all those that come after them, they're making different choices. And so if you're building businesses and you want the best people to be with you, you have to be the best leader you can be. And that means every single day you get up and realize, oh God, I failed at this yesterday, but I'm going to try again today. And you know, it's that iteration thing. You have to just keep thinking, keep learning, keep being interested, and certainly do not dictate from on high. At least that's been my experience. You know, that's just not the way to get the game played.
And in terms of creativity and unleashing creativity of those around you, the last question is a word, a phrase, or a picture that represents creativity to you.
That's a really good question, and I've been thinking about that all the way through this discussion. And as you can tell, I've got a million words, too many sometimes to describe things. But how about this, and which would be paint your own picture. So, you know, we very rarely do that in life. Just to explain that, paint your own picture. We often are playing onto a landscape that's already painted in for us. So if you want to innovate, if you want to be truly creative, you have to paint your own picture. So I think I'll go with that one.
Thank you so much, Audette, for discussing how you bridge two worlds together, about leadership, about bringing in and the importance of championing different voices and bringing them into the room. It's been a true privilege. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Lovely to talk to you. I just love seeing women leaders out there trying to affect change, and you're obviously one of those. So very happy to have had the chance to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Audette.